dear Hall, dear Reid Hoffman. I'm Loïc Dosseur, the co-CEO of Paris&Co, the Economic and Innovation Agency of Paris. I'm very happy to welcome you in this little place, the big, probably one of the biggest incubator in Europe. Paris&Co is a little firm, an association with more than 300 startups incubate each year. But it's not the subject. You are the subject of this day. We are very, very happy and proud. It's emotional to be able to exchange with you this day. So please, if you want to come here.
In a minute.
Ok.
Ah, c'est bon?
Toi qui enchaîne.
Super.
Ok. Thank you.
Merci Loïc pour ton accueil. Qui est-ce qui était dans LinkedIn? Who was in LinkedIn before 2005? Please stand up. Please. 2005. Reid, look at the early adopters. I was 2003. Yes. Please say who came to LinkedIn before 2008. Before 2008, look at, please, Carlo, stand up. Yes. Who came to LinkedIn before 2010? Ah, before 2014. Before 2018. Please welcome Reid Hoffman, who changed our world. You're welcome. Okay, this was an opportunity to have a direct contact with Reid right now. So we are very lucky today, as Loïc said, to receive for a masterclass Reid Hoffman. And Reid is, of course, the founder of LinkedIn. Before that, he was one of the key people of PayPal, and I discovered that you even worked with Apple. How is it possible? You made it. Okay, I spoke with Guy Kawasaki a few years ago, and he was still surprised to have worked for Apple. Okay, and we have two main subjects today prepared by Optic and Paris&Co. The two main subjects are impact investment and ethics by design. And we will share the masterclass in two parts. First is an exchange between Reid and myself about a few questions on understanding his feeling, his thinking, his convictions on impact investment and ethical by design. So this will take approximately half of the masterclass, and then you will have the opportunity to ask, to Reid directly a few questions. Is that clear for everybody?
So far.
Good, thank you very much. So we are very lucky also because Reid in his LinkedIn profile said that he is currently still entrepreneur, product strategist, and investor, even if he is working today mainly as one of the partners of Greylock, which is one of the best VCs in the Valley. So please read. The first part will be yourself as an investor, how do you see some things? Then yourself as an entrepreneur, and we have here investors and entrepreneurs who have been selected to have the chance to come and meet with you. And we wish, as a friend, as an advisor, that you tell us what would you recommend to us to go to this direction of impact investment and ethical by design. Okay? So please read, as a first question, as an investor, what would you tell us as the definition of what you think about the definition of what is impact investment, and why do you believe it's important for us?
So thank you, and actually for the entertainment and the audience, the very first member to sign up for LinkedIn is my co-founder Jean-Luc Varion, who is a graduate of École Polytechnique. So just to be, you know, there is a French tie, and so the obvious couple of points to make about impact investing, and then a few less obvious points. So the obvious points are, what are the metrics by which you're essentially improving the state of humanity? What are the, you know, obviously you want things in businesses that have, you know, revenue lines and profit lines and good employment and those sorts of things. But what are the other ways you do it? So for example, one of the funds that I helped get constructed this year is called the RISE Fund. And part of what they do when they begin to think about how do they measure impact is they think about the dollar creation of social good as an amplifier of the revenue. So metrics are good because you can say, did I succeed? How do I improve? How do I learn? And that was the central one, essentially, for the RISE Fund as a way of doing it. And because the people doing it were friends of mine, I said, look, I can help, and Greylock does investing. Its primary impact is our LPs, or, you know, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Princeton, et cetera, et cetera.
So, some good guys.
Yes, so we make them money. We try to do good in the world too, but the principal thing is money. Now, one of the ways, the two things to think about when you begin to get to the details of investing, which apply to impact investing. The first is how to think about scale. And scale is number of people times depth of impact you have on them times time. It's a cross product of those three things. And so one of the things that people always do is, oh, well, it has to be, you know, hundreds of millions of people. Well, not necessarily. If you do 500,000 people, like a massive impact over time, that's really valuable because it's the integration of the curve. It's the cross product of all three. And this is actually one of the reasons why I have a very strong preference, whether it's in American, the system, we have both 501c3s, which are nonprofits, and also impact investing when you invest in corporations that have a public good mission, or a kind of a second metric, a double bottom line as a way of doing this. In all of those cases, I look for business models. And I look for business models because business models are part of what give you that over time, right? So if you actually have something that is continuing to do really good, and even if it, for example, take as a nonprofit, is like Do Something, one of the nonprofits I'm on the board of, is the largest teen philanthropic action network in the world. So it enables teenagers to go do things that doesn't require a car, less relevant here in Europe, but in the US, very relevant. Doesn't require a car, parental approval, or money. And what can you do? And so, for example, the kinds of things that came out of Do Something were, and when you begin to measure impact, was they had a campaign which is jeans for the homeless, and teens literally went door to door collecting jeans so they can be given to homeless people. And then that can be part of things. So, but Do Something, by the way, gets 80% of its funds from sponsorships from people like Pepsi and everything else, because then it fits back in it. So it's all kind of versions in the impact investing.
To be clear, it's not social business.
No.
It's normal business with a kind of ethical level.
Well, Do Something is a 501c3, but for example, on the impact investing side, one of the let's say two investments that I've made over the last couple of years. One of them is called change.org, which is petitioning. And the goal is how do you enable people to petition a corporation or a government to change its policy to be more human focused, right? Like to be more compassionate. And it has a business model, and it is a business. It's invest in it. I own shares, right? But the goal, of course, is to enable the powerful institutions being responsible to democracy, to people expressing their voice about what's needed for human nature. As a different vector, part of when we say, well, how do we bring the whole human race along? One of the things that happens is, can you have an economically productive society And we have a benefit in the first world of robust banking systems, robust financial systems. Without those, it's very difficult to get an economy going. So one of the investments I've made is called Segovia, which is essentially building low-cost electronic payments across all of Africa. Not just the M-Pesa in Kenya, which is doing well, but how to do that, and is doing that as an enterprise business. So what it does is it sells payments infrastructure to governments and corporations, but with a goal of bringing the whole society into an electronic transactions, which will enable entrepreneurship and business and everything else to flourish.
Okay, so what do you think about the impact of technologies you invest in the society? How will the society become better?
So the way that I mostly look at this, so I, having founded LinkedIn, earlier company SocialNet,
yes.
I think about individuals interacting in networks and groups is the primary thing that I think about doing. And so when I think about social impact or impact investing, that's part of the reason I was mentioning like Change and Segovia. So in Change, in addition to, thank you, in addition to kind of questions of like, it's a business, is it profitable, et cetera, it's okay, how many petitions did we have? How many laws did we change? How many policies did we change? How do you cluster those policies within a, for example, is it a question of being appropriate to lower income? Is it being appropriate to kind of diversity and inclusion and race and gender, and then how many of those things did we do? And then in Segovia, it's how much do we enable the entire economic ecosystem of countries within Africa to start participating in the benefits of electronic payments. And so those are additional metrics that you measure yourself against as part of succeeding, not only as a company, but as a mission.
Okay. When you spoke about Change, did you mean change.org?
Yes.
Good. Who has been already in the room, already on change.org? Okay, we're approximately half of the people here. Do you recommend us to go on and then bring good in the society and value to you as an investor?
Well, I'm delighted to get value as an investor. Although, for me, when I do impact investing, I am less focused, because I've already been fortunately lucky in a number of my commercial impacts, on pure equity value as much as I am on sustained organization, sustained investment. So when I do impact investing, my actual goal is I would like 30 to 50 years from now that company to have grown and how it's affecting society and to still be persistent. It's in a sense, think about building institutions where those institutions are not only like governments and universities and so on, but actually organizations which can have essentially immortal impact. If it's a profitable organization and it's managed well, it can potentially do its mission and its good, theoretically, forever.
It's the first time I heard a few hundreds of VCs. It's the first time I hear one who says that he thinks for the next 30 to 50 years. Yeah. And this is an incredible difference. Thank you very much. Now, Reid, please, as an entrepreneur, ethical by design means doing things right. Why do you believe that an entrepreneur should add this level to his entrepreneurial project?
So, I'll start with a funny expression that some of you may know I'm known for in Silicon Valley,
yes.
Which is, if you're not embarrassed by your first product release, you release too late. It's a software metric, which is the importance of speed and time in getting a product to market. Now, you might think that means cutting corners on certain things, and the answer that you want is it's okay to be embarrassed by a lack of functionality. It's okay to be embarrassed by the fact that, like when LinkedIn launched, it didn't really have a really highly functioning search feature. It was there, but it wasn't really functional.
You are honest today.
But you improve over time is the key thing.
Yes.
But what you want to do is you want to be able to say to the people around you is to say, why is it you're doing what you're doing? And to have, even if you as a business have secret plans that are kind of your strategy, if it was, and this is a US context, this is how part of how you create company cultures is you create memes within the culture, is the meme from the very first group meeting we had is, everything that we do should be printable on the front page of the New York Times. Right, so how we manage people's data, how we, what features we build with them. If we could easily go over to our family dinner, and everyone has read it, and we go, yeah, of course, that's what we're doing. And so part of what you want to do is you want to design the incentives that go the whole way down the organization, because frequently one of the ways that companies can go wrong, especially as they scale, is the incentives are, well, I'm just going to maximize my revenue. And that's the only thing that matters. And if the only thing that matters is I'm maximizing your revenue, then of course you ultimately cut corners. Of course you ultimately do things that you may not want to have printed on the front page of the Times. And so what's really important is how you essentially design your organizational culture and how you hold each other accountable. And so, for example, another one that we codified in the second year at LinkedIn is we realized that a majority of our revenue was going to come from businesses, and organizations always naturally orient around revenue. It goes anything from nonprofits, which is how you raise money from donors. It's like that orientation around revenue is the classic thing for an organization. So part of when you're setting up a company culture and trying to make it accountable to a mission, you're actually trying to set up the kind of the slopes that are important for the revenue to slip down on. And so, for example, the very first principle, still today, from 2005, maybe late 2004, was the customer that matters to us first is the individual who doesn't pay us. Right? Wow. So that is the very, so when you're asking any product management question, maximize this metric, build this feature, how does it play against that customer? Because that's essentially where you start with trust. Because it's very easy to go to, well, who are the people paying us? Do what they want, right? And by the way, you want to do what they want to, right? Sure. But it was important as a part of the design of the organization, which is delivering the product, to organize your company. And then that's part of where things like, for example, architectural design. So we made sure that our values were put in graphically nice and everything else. But on every single meeting room wall in every office that we've had, including kind of scaling across the, I don't know if it's in every office around the world because I haven't been to everyone, but many of them. In order to know that, for example, like if I say, hey, we should do this thing, like me, Reid, I say we should do this thing, and then someone says, well, but the value says individual members first, and they won't like this, right? And I go, oh, okay, and that's how you essentially is one place where you can create ethical organizations. The other one is to try to align your outputs with things that that matter to people. So, part of the, on one hand you say, well, it's better for LinkedIn for people to be connected. The answer is yes. And so we put a lot of energy into helping facilitate ease of connection. But it's also better for members to be connected, right? They may not always understand, they may not always agree. There's times where you get irritated because you get an invitation to connect from someone you don't know who's overly enthusiastic. Sure. Those are problems. You try to slope those down. But you try to make as much of what the business objectives are align with also what the goods that you're trying to do in the world are. And so, for example, it was already by 2004 that we had companies asking us, could you tell us which people are thinking about looking for a job? And the answer is, yes, we could, but no, we won't, right? Because again, it's the individual member first.
Okay. How, in what you said a few times the word revenue. Of course, an entrepreneur has to think of profitability, how, in your mind and in your experience, do you see the entrepreneurs now thinking both in profitability and ethics?
So there's always some real tension between profitability and mission, because essentially you could either take the dollar as profit or you can reinvest in the mission. If you take the dollar as profit, you're not reinvesting in the mission. And most interesting missions you can invest infinite money into, right? So now you say, well, I take it as profit. Okay, fine, and maybe I get higher shareholder price and I get more employees and so forth, and you could say it's indirectly that. But I actually think that part of the way to think about this is it's a combination of creating a valuable business and also creating good impact. And you could decide, you know, like, okay, everything above a certain profit line, or you could decide half and half, or you could decide, look, I'm going to make the, like LinkedIn, as long as it fits within the constraints of being, you know, kind of printable on the front page of the New York Times, individual members first, can be as profitable as it can be, right? Yes. And so you can make all of those kinds of parts as decisions. I think that the really key thing is to make sure that you have a horizontal discourse within the company that says, this is what our mission is, this is what we're trying to achieve. And the mission isn't, by the way, you know, 25%, you know, gross margin, right? Our mission is enabling every individual in the world to have the most control over their economic path and economic destiny they can. And you say, are we meeting that, right? And part of that is being a good business as we're doing it. So.
Okay. And how much an entrepreneur and as an investor, how much ethics should be in the mindset of entrepreneurs like the ones who are today with us, and how do you evaluate it as an investor?
Oh, that's the second question.
Yeah, sure, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
So
the mindset first.
Yes. So essentially, I think that there are there's three states of answer to the place of ethics. So the first is you know, kind of popularized with Google. Don't be evil. Like everyone should not be evil. And it means don't cause more suffering. Blocking human potential, blocking the ability to have interesting things, human progress. And so that, I think, is a requirement for everybody. Not everybody necessarily follows it, but it is in fact a requirement for everybody. The next thing is to say, okay, essentially say, look, I'm creating a business. I'm doing these things to create a business, and I have a mission, but I'm basically creating a business. So you might create a business that's around, for example, you know, luxury goods, you know, high-end wine, right? It's great. High-end wine's really, I like drinking it. It's awesome. You know, and you know, there are people who enjoy it. It's not what you would say is the most ethical high-end calling that one could have, but it's perfectly good. And so it's kind of in the category of, look, I'm doing good as I can, and I'm creating this business. People buy my product, and I employ people. We're not having negative impact in the world, and there's a group of people and customers and employees, all of whom really enjoy this. And then the third state is where you go, my goal, my strategy, is I would like the world to have become a better place from my having been here. I want it to be more compassionate. I want it to be wiser. I want to have many more people have the full expression of their human impact potential. I wanted to create more social equality. You know, I wanted to have reform things. And then you can have those as outputs to your business too. And I think between that range is a personal choice, and all of them are acceptable. I think it's perfectly fine. We need all of that within a functioning society. Now, as an investor, I really kind of have two different hats. I have an investor where I'm trying to make money for my LPs, and then you want businesses that are good, healthy, functioning businesses in the world, but you know, if at the end of the day it's an enterprise security company, right, and you're selling security solutions, by the way, good for companies to be secure, right? but you're essentially a business. Or if you're doing something where, let's take, for example, Airbnb, and you say that
where you are a member of the board.
Yep. Where you say, look, part of what we're doing is, yes, we're creating a business. Yes, it creates a good economic impact for Airbnb. But among the other kinds of impacts are people who might not otherwise be able to afford the rent or their mortgage now have a supplementary source of income. People who when they come to a country, you want to create cultural connection. You want to create a understanding and bridges and kind of more of a sense of sympathy and empathy. Well, actually, in fact, going and hosting and visiting are the precise ways to do that. And those are also part of how you think about what you're designing in your product, which areas you're taking risk, what are you investing in. And so it kind of goes through the whole range. And I think those are important to do. And those are all things that I invest in as an investor. And then sometimes you go, look, I know that there's going to be a limited profitability. I know that this is not going to be, you know, even a public company, but it can be a company that makes profits, e.g. it continues to invest in itself, and this change the world is important to have in the whole ecosystem. And that's when I do essentially impact investing, which I do personally, Segovia, Change.org.
In addition to Greylock?
Yes,
okay.
But not from Greylock, because Greylock is, you know, we have Harvard's money and we have Stanford's money, and we're investing that money in order to have them pay for research and students and so forth.
So you are still yourself a business angel?
Yes.
Okay, for those who are interested for
impact investing.
Okay, thank you. And now, and for yourself, prepare your questions already. The third part of our exchange before the questions and answers with the audience. Now, as a friend, first of all, thank you again to have joined us today in Paris. And I understand it's a kind of also European visit for you, and to enhance the visibility of impact investment and the ethics in the business. What advice could you give to Optique and Paris&Co to make it happen, to help the entrepreneurs who are here to become more ethical and to accompany them to succeed?
Well, I think the fact that people are here already is a very good sign that they are, because part of the path to ethics is asking the question, right, of yourself, of others. Once you start doing that and are learning and thinking, that's the path that you're on. And so I don't know if I have anything to add to that for the people who already go, I'm thinking about it, I'm coming here, I'm listening, I'm talking about it. Converse, learn, think. The same thing I do and all of you do. So I'm not sure I would have had anything to do there. What I would say is that very often, actually I'll say three things. Very often that people think business and ethics there's tensions, right? Because I want to make a bunch of money and maybe I don't care as much about the environment, or I don't care as much about like social equality and so forth. And so there are tensions, but they are not 100% misaligned. That part of how you think about sustainable change is how do you create business models around it, right? So, you know, for example, you know, part of the approaches that I like towards the ecology of oceans is how do you create business models around sustainable fishing, around sustainable, clean, kind of water and air and so forth, you know, carbon taxes and reprints, and those kinds of things. The business models are a very central way to thinking about these kinds of scale, especially at change, change at scale. And then the second piece is, one of the things I was struck by is there's a book called Conscious Business by an author I really like named Reid Hoffman. And I think Fred makes an excellent modern day Adam Smith case for the kind of, think of it as the spirituality of capitalism or the spirituality of business, which is that in a sense, and this is one of the things that's not as often commented upon Adam Smith, which is by being in business, I am of service to others. I'm building a product or service, the person, you know, buys it. It's my way of saying I am of service to you. And typically, at least in American business schools, too often it's taught that management is hard-nosed, you make decisions, you have metrics, you fire people, etc. And part of what Fred is pointing out is that if you actually have global compassion in mind, the way of running an effective business is actually, in fact, to some degree, being compassionate to your customers. So, as an example that I pull from his book, Conscious Business, if you had a doctor who was giving out bad advice and causing a bunch of ill health as a function of that, actually, in fact, being compassionate to the world, you actually change that doctor from their job. And so if you actually in mind, and this is kind of also templates of kind of what you learn from Buddhism and other great religions, is if you say, my intent is compassion and that's how I'm thinking about it and that's what I'm trying to do, it doesn't always mean that it's the right result, but that's what I'm trying to do, and that's how you're approaching it, you can actually be very compassionate in the management of business, and that's the way that you can approach it. And then the third thing is, so first is business model, second is compassionate management, and then the third one is thinking about the question of how the entrepreneurs will frequently think about what is opened up in terms of technology, and you'll have undoubtedly heard this a lot from, maybe this is a subset to the business model point as I think about this, but you heard this a lot from Silicon Valley. They say disruption, disruption, disruption. Doesn't seem like a really particularly great thing to be saying. But here's what's interesting. I think one of the ways to think about disruption, and this is kind of the impact investing, is you take $10 of revenue out of a system and replace it with $1. And if you can do that, then you create $9 that can then go and invest in other things, and that creates it as more of a platform that can then enable other kinds of applications being built. And so one of the key things to do is to think about what are the ways to essentially impact entrepreneurship is to have the business model or the revenue model be part of the change you're doing. So, for example, one of the unfortunately, I didn't know Jimmy Wales when he was starting Wikipedia, and met him a couple of years afterwards. Helped him create Wikimedia, which is a for-profit company that's working in kind of a different space with a social mission. And think about how different Wikipedia would be if it just even had a light business model. Right now, it has to do the kind of please subscribe, please give us money, and it does that kind of advertising. Mm-hmm. If you did a light business model and could continue to invest in what that public knowledge base is, say for example, you could even get more into education, you could get more in other things, and you'd say all of this content is free to everyone in the world if the business model is done the right way. And so that's the thing to think about is this disruption where maybe, okay, I'm now providing this new platform at a much lower dollar revenue, but that is then enabling the entire world. That actually can be an impact maneuver as well.
Do you know the world to create an encyclopedia? A French philosopher.
Excellent. Does not surprise me.
Diderot.
Oh yeah, of course. Yes. Yes.
Denis Diderot. Good. So we are now discussing about helping entrepreneurs to have a new scale. When we prepared this masterclass with the team of Paris&Co and Optic, we thought of born global expression, and we thought that maybe it may be of sense to say born ethical. How do you feel about that?
That's a philosophical question.
Yes.
So my theory of human nature is essentially people are it's both nature and nurture, and it's like a curve. Like there's people who are, you can tell, genetically born sociopathic. They don't have empathy for other people's pain. And there's people who are more naturally empathetic, but it can also be learned. And yes. So I have a similar view to ethics, which is I think that for some people it comes very naturally. For some people it's much more challenging. And in all cases, through the practice of community discourse, meditation, learning, you can improve. So I think it's perhaps born with the potential to be ethical.
Ah, okay. This is a great conclusion of the first part. Now it's your part, and please ask for questions. Who is ready for a first question? What's your first name?
François.
And what do you do now?
Well, I'm a co-founder of a startup that maybe
yes, please.
We can share.
Okay, thank you.
Very quickly. Our startup is all about helping all people who are not internet user friendly to transform a TV set into a video conference solution so that they can speak with their grandchildren.
And do you wish to raise money?
Venture is local too.
After the question.
Yes, indeed. Sorry for this, but maybe...
what's your question, sir?
My question is, you insist a lot on the link between business model, profit, and mission, okay? So we see your intention, but what are the questions we should ask to ourselves to check if we have a sound, sustainable business model? Because business model is all about creating a business first. Yep. What are the additional questions we should ask to ourselves? I don't know if my question is clear.
Well, I'll try to answer, and if I don't, ask it again, if I don't get it clear. So there's a couple different, and perhaps to fully answer the question would take too much time, but there's a couple different questions where you think about how to pull together a business model. And the simple ones, obviously, is someone buys a product or a service. And then that's kind of like, what is your unit cost for delivering? How does that unit cost change as you go from, ones to tens to hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of delivery of the product or service? Because, by the way, your unit cost, your actually cost model may be in fact above your revenue model for the tens, but when you get to the thousands, it works, right? Kind of classic. And so you think about what that whole curve looks like, and you think about, but it also, part of what you want to look at is almost always most businesses have one or two primary drivers. So if you're not going to, this is kind of the more subtle part of the thing, if you're not going to make it as a valuable business with essentially one or two revenue lines off the thing you're doing, then most likely you won't make it, because the complexity of multiple kind of business models usually will kill you. You can experiment some, but you can end up focusing on them. And then the next kind of part of it is to say, all right, how long does it take you? Because usually to get a business model, you have to have a certain number of, a certain volume, whether it's a volume of product service or a volume of advertising or kind of a volume of the creation of strategic value, which causes, for example, Pepsi to sponsor do something. Yes. You have to look at what the pathway to that business, how long will it take you to get to that volume? Because if that takes you too long, your capital runs out, right? And that's another viable part of that. And so it's the speed of that relative, the speed to, and actually, in fact, the speed to where you actually, I'm sorry, this is probably the best framework to answer this question is the way that I actually do investing, which is I write down a list of theories, like statements, usually between 3 and 7, that are, if these things end up being true, then this business is worth investing in. And they're not like, oh, the people are good and know how to execute, take that as granted. But it's things like, well, people will buy this in the following way. This will work as a go-to-market strategy, as a product or service distribution strategy. This will work in terms of where people will prefer this over something else. And then on that list of hypotheses, what I'm looking for is the soonest possible time that I can begin to get evidence whether or not my theory of the investment is correct or not. And as I get the evidence, I either know that I have to stay on target or I have to pivot. And the same thing is true for business models. Because if, for example, you get first piece of evidence, the business model not going to work. Second piece of evidence, the business model's not going to work. Third piece of evidence, business model's not going to work. You start thinking about pivoting, right? What do you change? And it doesn't mean like sometimes it takes a while, and usually the second order derivative of that, which is well, now my ideas are less good than the ideas before and it's still not working, then you must pivot. So. In the back.
Merci, Christophe.
Here too. Yeah.
What's your first name and your business and your question to Reid?
My name is Henry. I have a business in education and learning. And so my question is on education and learning, because I know LinkedIn acquired lynda.com a while back. And you also said in your previous conversation that learning was a big part of ethics for people. So, and I really believe it's super important for when you talk about ethics, you have to talk about how you raise that issue to people when they're young. I mean, it's super important. And the US also has, I believe, quite a significant issue with the price of higher education. So all of this is just, what's your vision on this? What's the future with technology? How's that going to evolve? Is there a business model where it's free for kids or cheap for kids, more pricey for businesses? What's your vision?
He wants to improve his business model.
Excellent. Well, so by the way, just one thing in defense of American universities that most people don't realize is the reason why universities like Stanford and Harvard and so forth have these very high tuition rates is they're actually very price dependent. So, for example, if I had a child and they were going to Stanford, I'd pay full price because I'm wealthy, right? You know, and that's as it should be. But if someone else, like a journalist, someone else who wasn't making as much money, they would have a lot of scholarship. And so they actually, partially looks like, oh my God, that's a crazy price. But that's actually really price discrimination, right? It's you can afford it, you can't. And a number of these universities, Stanford for sure, and I think a number of the other ones, but I happen to just be close and see Stanford, admit need blind. They just say, you can come, and then we'll figure out what the economics are there. So it's important. They so often get thrown under the bus because the sticker price is so outrageous. But it's price discrimination. Now, to the real question. Obviously, the main target for a healthy society is to provide as much high-quality free education to every human being as possible. Right? That is the obvious target, and anyone who doesn't think that has something wrong with them. Right? So, now, technology is one way you do that. So that's why you experiment with, okay, how broadly can you make things happen? Like, for example, when I met Sal Khan of Khan Academy, he was just doing YouTube stuff. I was like, okay, what's the way that we can scale this, and how do we do this? The questions around not only is it kind of broadcast from technology, but how can we organize that we can teach and learn from each other in terms of cells and groups? And then part of it is to try to get to, this, the easy thing is skills that lead to economic improvement, right? Which is, of course, what LinkedIn mostly focuses on. A little bit on the how do you run a business well and so forth, but mostly economic improvement because it's the mission. And then the more difficult one is like civics and ethics and so forth. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm a fan of essentially universal public education, and I'm also a fan of, which is a little bit less popular or a little less, there's more disagreement about this in the US, is to actually in fact have, like for example, I think there should be mandatory ethics classes. The people who disagree with me think that what I'm saying is, you're going to say, you're going to be a good person is your mandatory ethics class, right? Not a very useful class. I agree. That one is not helpful. However, the kind of questions where you say, well, no, we're going to have an ethics class where we're at least going to all talk about kind of key questions. Like, for example, where is the responsibilities of the individual to the community, and where are the responsibilities of the community to the individual, and what things are allowed for kind of individual decisioning. And then you should start at a relatively early age with, okay, you see that boy take that boy's lunch, right, in the schoolyard. What do you do? What's your responsibility, right? You can start very early with those kinds of questions. And having the question going is, I think, the process you do. So that's, and I think that, fortunately, I think that will ultimately have to be publicly funded or kind of equivalent, because I don't think you'll create a market for it. And this is, like, one of the things is there's things that markets do very well, and there's things that you have to create the basis of the market. And I think most of the ethical education has to be provided kind of within the social context.
First name, business, and question.
My business is in human resources tools. I have a question about relationship